Hey everybody, welcome back to my channel. It's Jenna from the Up North Home. So today I wanted to bring you guys along while I can some bone broth. So yesterday I went ahead and made some chicken and rabbit bone broth in my Instant Pot. That is the typical way that I do it. So it takes 2 or 3 loads in the Instant Pot to get enough to fill up my canner. So I typically get about 3 to 3.5 quarts of bone broth per load of bone broth in my Instant Pot. I have the 6 quart. Then when I'm done, when I do a load, and then I'll put it into some mason jars and put it in the fridge. I'll let it cool off kind of at room temperature for a bit, and then I'll stick it in the fridge with just some of the plastic breathable kind of lids. And then the next morning or the next day when I have a chance, if there's any fat that came to the top, it will have floated to the top and solidified there on the top. And I take a spoon or whatever and I scoop off all of that fat and I pull it out and it's ready to can. By that time I've got enough to fill the canner with. And so now that is where we're going to pick up. Is at that point I just got my stock out of the fridge and I am going to skim the fat off, which really I'm surprised there's almost no fat on this batch. So, but that's fine. Sometimes there's a lot of fat, sometimes there's not, just depending on what kind of carcasses you use. And also when I use the rabbit carcasses, I tend to not have a whole lot of fat going on. But so I got my stock here on the counter and I'll show you kind of the setup, and I'll try to give you as much detail as I can and to what I'm doing and everything. I know that pressure canning in particular can be kind of scary and intimidating, but this is a really good step for beginners. If you haven't pressure canned yet and you are wanting to, but you're a little bit nervous, pressure canning something like this is really easy because you can make your broth and do all that ahead of time, and then when you're ready to come back and can, you're going to just heat it up to a boil, get it nice and hot, fill your hot jars, and can it. I promise you, if you are ready to try pressure canning, this is a great opportunity to do so, and bone broth is so awesome to have on your pantry shelf. So let's go ahead and get started. I really encourage you that if you have a pressure canner and you are nervous to try canning bone broth. It's really easy. So let's go ahead and get started. All right, so you guys, I like to get all of my stuff laid out and ready before I can. That way I don't have anything to worry about or think about while I am pressure canning. So I will be using my All-American pressure canner. This is the 24 quart, and I am on an electric glass top stove. I've done it lots of times, never had any problems. So check with your stove manufacturer if you have an electric stove. Read the manual, maybe give them a call and just see what they say. But the All-American canner does great on my glass cooktop stove. So I've got my bone broth sitting here all ready to go. It's all cold, pulled out of the fridge at this point, and just sitting here with plastic lids on, and we are going to empty these jars into our big stock pot. I've got my large stock pot here, and we are just going to empty the broth into this and get it warmed up to a boil. I have my handy dandy measure tool so that I can get these to 1-inch headspace. I've got my jar lifter so that we can pull the jars out after they have processed. I have got a funnel so that I don't spill all over the counter, along with a clean towel back here. I've got a little dish with some vinegar in it so I can wipe my rims, and a rag to wipe my rims. And I have already cleaned 7 quart jars and rings and lids as well. So we are all set to go ahead and get the broth into our pot, and we will get that warming up. While that's warming up, I'm going to also get my get some water in and the jars into my pressure canner, and we're going to get that warming up as well so our jars are nice and hot and ready to go when our broth is. So I'm going to get my jars all placed inside, and make sure that you have the little trivet down in the bottom of your canner that probably came with your canner, because you don't want the glass jars to be sitting right on the bottom of your canner. Now we're going to put a couple inches of water in the bottom. You never want your water to run dry, so you always want to make sure that you have the recommended amount of water in there. And I'm going to pour in hot water so that it doesn't take as long to get heated up. You can also put in some white vinegar if you want, to try to keep the hard water, the calcium buildup off of your jars. So on my bubble poking measuring tool, I marked the 2-inch mark here so that I can stick it down in there and see when I'm at the proper level. So it is recommended for 2 inches, so I'm going to fill it up until it gets to that mark, and I'll just stick this down there and test it. All right, so we are up to 2 inches of water, so I'm going to go ahead and get my stove turned on to about a medium-high heat to get it, bringing it up to a simmer, get it nice and warm in there. And in the meantime, I'm going to go ahead and get my bone broth all poured in and get that heating up too. Alrighty, so now we will turn that up to high and get this up to a boil, and then we will shut it off and load it into our hot jars. Our jars are all in the canner with 2 inches of water and ready to go. So we've got this warming and this warming at the same time. Alright, so while I am waiting for everything to heat up and the bone broth to come to a boil, I just make sure I have all of my supplies ready and lined up so that I don't forget any of my steps. So I'm just waiting for the bone broth to come to a boil, and I've got everything, my kind of canning station, all set up and ready so that everything flows easily and everything is clean and organized. So I've got my clean rings and lids, and it's no longer a requirement or suggestion to boil the lids. These are new lids, so the new lids, they've said you no longer have to boil them or heat them or anything. So I just have them clean and ready right here. I've got everything on towels so that when I pull my hot jars out, I don't set them on the cold counter. And also I feel like it just keeps everything dry and clean. It kind of catches stuff so that you don't get a wet, slippery counter. So I like to always have a clean towel that I can set. Usually depending on what I'm canning, I'll set 2 jars at a time and fill 2 and put them in there. And I've got my measuring tool. So we are canning a liquid, so we don't have to worry about bubbles or anything. But we want to fill the jars to 1-inch headspace. So we're going to use this tool here to measure that and make sure. I've got my funnel, and I just like to set it in this little glass dish so that it stays clean and off the counter. And when I get it dirty with whatever I'm canning, in this case the bone broth. Then when I am done, I can set it here and I don't have to worry about broth getting all over the counter and it getting everything dirty or sticky, getting my jars dirty. So, and then I've just got my dish here with the vinegar, because if we get any fat or juice or anything on the rim of the jar, we really want to wipe that off and cut the grease so that we get a nice seal with our lids. And I've just got a small piece of towel that I cut that I use for the top of jars, and I thought that would be a nice size to just use so that I can clean my lids. And that's really it. We have a nice, clean, organized workspace to get these canned up. So we've still got a little bit, but it looks like it's starting to get warmed up. So once this is boiling, we'll move on to the next step. All right, so our broth is boiling, so it is ready. I'm just gonna turn the stove off and start bringing out jars to fill up. So these jars have been simmering in the water, so they are nice and warm. I'm just gonna grab my funnel. Alright, so I got my big ladle and I'm just gonna start filling jars. And like I said before, for bone broth, you're going to fill to 1-inch headspace. So we're going to get this pretty full, and then we will just check at the end. I'm just going to fill both jars, and then before I put the lids on, I'll just check to make sure that the headspace is correct. I typically like to use narrow mouth jars or the regular mouth jars when I do bone broth. Especially nowadays, it's really hard to find wide mouth lids, and they tend to cost more as well. So if it's something like this where it's a liquid anyways, I don't mind using the regular mouth jars. Alright, so to check the headspace, we just take our measuring tool, and this top little step here is going to sit on the edge of the jar, and that will measure down 1 inch. So you can see that we can put more in this jar. We're not quite to the 1 inch. So I'm going to grab my ladle with a little bit in there and put a little bit more in. Alright, so now the liquid is touching the very bottom of that, so I am at the perfect headspace there. Alright, and I got a little bit too much there, so I'm going to just remove a spoonful. Alright, and then I'll just test it again. Alright, so that's perfect. So now you're going to take that cloth that you had and dip it into your vinegar and just clean off the rim of your jar. Make sure it's all clean. And then we're going to center our lids on top. And then we are going to put on our rings to fingertip tight. Basically that just means as tight as you can with your fingertips. If you're grabbing it with your hand, that's too much. You don't want to use your hand with all of your force, just your fingertips. And then we're going to go ahead and put these into the canner. They are pretty hot, but if I grab the ring, I'm generally okay. All right, so we're just going to keep doing that until we get this canner all filled up. I've got my canner on a medium-low heat right now to keep the jars all warm. And we're just going to go ahead and get all these jars filled up. Okay, so we filled up 6 of our quart jars. The 7th one's only about half full, so I'm just going to put the lid on that, and once it's cool, I'll put it in the fridge and we'll use it right away. All right, so when we put on our lid, we make sure all these little C-clamps are underneath where they're supposed to be, that the lid is sitting level side to side with an even gap, and then same looking front to back, it should be as level as possible. And then we're going to alternate sides, so I'm going to take this and the back one opposite and tighten these down just to where they're touching. And then I'm going to do opposites again over here, these two. And again, I'm just going to tighten until they are touching. And then I'm going to grab the front one and the back one, and I am going to turn them just till they're touching. And now I'm going to really tighten them down. And I'm just going to do opposites again until they're nice and tight. All right, so those are good and tight. I'm going to turn my heat up to a medium high, and we are going to wait until this starts to get hot. So as this gets hot, you'll build a little bit of pressure, but not much, because we have our vent open. So we are going to bring this heat up so that we start to see a constant flow of steam coming out of our vent. And then after 10 minutes of venting that steam, we will be ready to put our weight on, build up our pressure, and start the canning process. Okay, so it's been a few minutes and we've got our stove still at kind of a medium-high heat, and we are starting to get a good flow of steam out of our vent. So once you get a solid stream, you probably can't see it on the camera, but once you get a solid stream of steam coming out of your vent pipe, you're going to go ahead and start your timer for 10 minutes, and we're going to just let the pressure get building in there, and it's going to push that steam out of the hole. We're just going to let that steam come out so that we can get pressure inside the canner when we're ready. So we've got to get all that hot air out of there. So we're going to let that vent for 10 minutes. Alright, so we have been venting for 10 minutes and we're ready to go ahead and put our weight onto the vent. So as you can see by looking at the gauge, we have built up a few pounds of pressure. For my area, we're going to be at 10 pounds of pressure, so that's going to be about right here. We want to be just over 10 pounds. If at any point we go under 10 pounds, we're going to need to start over. So you're going to want to look at your area to see what elevation. If you're at a higher elevation, you may need to be at 15 pounds of pressure. So I'm going to go ahead and put my weight on here with the 10 pounds facing down. So I'm going to go ahead and put that on there. Now the canner is going to start to build pressure, so I'm just going to watch my pressure gauge, and I'm going to have to adjust my heat as the pressure goes up. So right now I'm at about a medium high, and I know that for my stove I'm going to end up wanting to be at about a medium low to maintain pressure at 10 pounds. So I'm going to just watch it, and as it gets close, I'm going to slowly begin to turn my temperature down on my stove until I hit that sweet spot, and then once we get up over 10 pounds, we can start our timer. So as we get up to pressure, this will start to jiggle, and we're going to want to have that jiggle maybe 4 or 5 times per minute. Rather have it jiggling a little bit more than not enough, because again, we got to stay above 10 pounds or whatever the poundage is for your area. So I am just watching my gauge go up. We're at about 5 pounds of pressure and climbing. So I'm going to go ahead and just turn my temperature down slightly. So when working on an electric stove, it's important that you adjust your temperature rather slowly, because if you know about working on an electric stove, it's not like gas. It doesn't have an instant change in temperature. So you're going to want to make small adjustments, give it a second to respond, and then turn it down a little bit more, wait, turn it down a little bit more until you get to the right spot. So we're about up to 10 pounds. I'm going to go ahead and turn my stove down just a little bit more, because I know from experience that I'm going to be about medium low with the temperature setting on my stove. So I am up to 10 pounds of pressure now. As you can see, we're sitting about 11. So now my jiggler is starting to jiggle. So I'm going to go ahead and start my timer. If you're doing quarts, you're going to do 25 minutes. If you are doing pints, you're going to do 20 minutes. So I'm going to go ahead and set my timer to 25 minutes. And now I'm going to just adjust my heat again. Alright, so we are done processing our bone broth, so we are going to go ahead and turn off our heat. And we are going to let our canner sit like this until it comes completely down to 0 pressure. So we're just going to leave it just how it is until we have 0 pressure. Alright, so our pressure has been down to 0, and we gave it another 5 minutes or so. And we are ready to remove our weight and get our lid off. So I'm going to go ahead and remove our lid. It's still pretty hot, so I'm going to use a towel. And now we are able to go ahead and remove our lid. So I'm going to go ahead and start to remove these just like I took them, or just like I put them on. Alright, so now we're ready to remove our lid, so I'm just going to remove it and point it away from me to release the steam. And set our lid down. So the the stuff inside the jars are definitely still really hot. We're going to leave them in the canner for about 10 minutes before we remove them so that they can equalize pressure. You can hear them clicking and unclicking and clicking and unclicking, and that's normal. So we're just going to let them sit there. All right, so we'll just see you guys back here in 10 minutes and we'll get these jars out of the canner. All right, so after 10 minutes, we're just going to remove our jars very carefully and setting them on the counter here with a towel. I like to keep a good amount of space between the jars so that they can get good airflow and cool faster. All right, there's our last jar. Those look great. All right, so we're gonna leave these sitting on the counter undisturbed until tomorrow. So sometime after I get up and have some coffee, we'll go ahead and wash the jars. We will take off the rings and we will test our seal to make sure that they're all sealed and clean, and then we will label them and put them down in the pantry. All right, so that was pretty easy. I hope that you guys found inspiration in this, and if you've never canned before, I really hope that you try it. Let me know in the comments below if you do try it, and I hope that you guys enjoy. I will see you guys in the next video. Thank you so much for joining me, and I'll see you guys soon. Bye.